Hilchos Maaser Perek Shloisha Asar. The laws of the Maaser separation, chapter 13, another perek on demai, questionable produce, but this time we're going to be learning about the lenient elements of demai. In other words, all the cases where we don't have to worry about demai. Typically, if you deal with a Jew who's not particular in his observance of the laws of Maaser, so you have to worry. You always have to suspect that any grain or produce that he gives you is perhaps maybe not tithed. But in a bunch of cases, that's the topic of today's perek, the suspicion of demai doesn't apply. So the Rambam begins with a list of specific types of fruit. Peiros shechazkasan mina hefker. Fruit that can be presumed to have come from something ownerless. Nobody would plant a field of these things. So if you find them in the market or in the city, they probably didn't come from somebody's personal possessions. Kegoin, for example, the Rambam gives a bunch of examples. The translations and the pictures that I'm going to give you here are based on the art scroll, Gemara and Demai, the way they translate these fruits. So they are hashisin. Shisin are what they call breba figs, these ones, specific type of species of figs. V'harimin, rimin is this, I know it looks a little bit like a pomegranate. It's called Ziziphus spina. I'm probably not even pronouncing it right in Latin. Whatever, some type of species. This is what the commentaries identify rimin as. V'ha uzradin. Uzradin is an argument. Either it's this is azarol, or the sorb. This is a tree that's called the service tree, and the fruits of the service tree are called the sorb. Uvnais shuach. B'nais shuach are typically translated as white figs. Ubnais shikma. Now, b'nais shikma is an argument. Either it's this one here, also a type of small fig, or because shikma is an argument what shikma means. Either shikma means a type of fig tree, or shikma is a sycamore tree. So if it's a fig tree, then it's this one. They're called Pinus pinnae, whatever. So if it's a fig, then it's supposed to be this one, some kind of species of figs. They actually say that it grows in Israel area. It's a very big tree. And if it's the sycamore, then it's this one. It's like an edible pine cone type of a thing.
Pine cone seeds.
Yes. That's the b'nois shikma according to another opinion.
Pine nuts.
Huh? Pine nuts?
Pine nuts.
Okay. The hagufnin. Gufnin is something related to the dill anise plant. They give the Latin word in art scroll, Funiculum vulgare, if that helps. The noivles hatmara. Noivles hatmara, or noivles tmara, are dates that are blown off a tree. So you have, these are the dates hanging over here. I actually found a better picture. Here's this. You see, these are dates on the floor here scattered from the tree. So those are typically not grown in regular ways. They probably came from something ownerless. Specifically, the fallen dates are the ones that haven't yet leavened. I know it's a funny word to use because dates don't rise, but at a certain point in their growth, the dates swell. It begins very small and then all of a sudden it becomes very big. It pops open. So before it pops open, that's called noivlois tmara. Hanitzpa. Nitzpa is this plant over here, Capparis spinosa. The hakusbar and coriander seed, that's this one. The chayotze bahen. Anything like these. These are just some examples. The point is, these are fruits that can be assumed to come from hefker. P'turin min admai. They're exempt from the suspicions of demai. The haloikhan me'ama aretz, and if you buy them from an unlearned Jew, you don't have to do any of the separations that you would typically do for demai. For example, taking the trumas maaser 1% for the Kohen, or the second tithe, because they're presumed to come from something ownerless, which has no obligation in general to be tithed. And even if the unlearned Jew tells him clearly, this fruit has not been tithed, they are exempt from Maaser until you find out for sure that it comes from something that's guarded, owned, and therefore obligated to be tithed. Halacha beis, habakurais v'hasiyafos. Early fruit and late fruit. Bakurais comes from the word bechor, which means firstborn. Siyafos comes from the word sof, which means end. So fruits that ripen super early and that ripen super late. Shababika, if they're in the open plains, pturin min admai. they're exempt from demai. You don't have to worry that perhaps they're not tithed. V'shebagina chayavim, but if they grow in the garden, then they're obligated to be suspected about demai mipnei shehin nishmarin, because they can be guarded, they can be owned properly.
But because it's just growing wild.
Exactly, that's the point. Because it grows wild, so therefore there's no worry about demai. Ve'elu hein habakures. What is considered early? How early is early? Kol ha'peres shebikru ad shelo yeshivu shomer al habikra lishmer pereseha. Any fruit that ripened before they put in the customary watchman who would watch the fruits in the open valley. I guess at a certain point in the planting or growing season was when the guard would come in. So before the guards come in, that's too early. The hasiyafos, what's considered late growing, late ripening fruits. Heina peres sheyishardu, it's all the fruits that remain. Achar sheyekaplu hamakzues shebasodes, after people typically fold up the drying nets in the field. The anichum below shomer, leaving them without a guard. We had this picture before already. How they used to do it was they would take the figs and put them in these little boxes or open up nets for them to dry out in the field. At a certain point, the drying season was done. You would fold up all these nets and go home. Whatever fruits remained out there without a guard is considered siyafos, is considered late. And on this we say that the early and the late fruits, if they're out in the wild, no worry about demai. If they're in the garden, then you have to worry. Vinegar made out of tmadim. Tmadim with a dalid is wine dregs. Some texts have tmarim, right? With dates, yes. So either it's vinegar made from dates, or it's vinegar made from temed, which is when you pour water over wine dregs and try to get some like a winey substance. Pater min admai. These are also exempt from the laws of demai because they're usually, nobody really cares about wine dregs, so it's hefker, so it's fine. Halacha gimel. Kishegazru al hadmai. To begin with, when they made a decree about demai, remember the decree was made because they sent agents around Israel to see how Jews are keeping the laws of tithes. So when they made that original decree, lo gazru ela al peres haaretz shehechziku ba oile bavel bilvad. They only decreed it about the fruits that grow in Israel, the part of Israel which was conquered by those who came up from Babylonia. Remember this? This is the original Israel, when the Jews came in from Mitzrayim, how much they conquered. And then you have the Oile Bavel, the red area here. When they came back up for the second time, they didn't conquer, they didn't settle the entire length of Israel, but they did go out wider into the Transjordan. So the Demai decree was only made on this area, the Oile Bavel territory, Shehu Mikziv V'lifnim, which lengthwise speaking is only from Kiziv inwards. So Kiziv, you can see, is on the map over here. I know it's a bit small, but up over here, this is the beginning point, going downwards where the decree of Demai was made. Well, Kiziv Atzma Kelachutz, but the city of Kiziv itself is considered outside the boundaries. So that any fruit that are found from Kiziv and outward, Pturin min Admai. They're exempt from Demai, because the produce that you find over there is presumed to have grown there. And produce that grows outside of Israel, for this context, doesn't have the problem of Demai. Once you know that produce came from the land that was conquered by the Oile Bavel, this territory, where the Demai prohibition is in effect, even if they're found in Syria. Syria is the area of land outside of Israel, which King David conquered, which has a quasi-status of Israel. Needless to say, if you find these fruit in the area of the Mitzrayim territory, the Israel that was conquered when the Jews came the first time, but since you know that it came from the Oile Bavel territory, they're obligated to be tithed as you would tithe any questionable produce, which means that you separate the trumas maaser, the 10th of the 10th, and the second tithe to bring to Yerushalayim. Lefichach, therefore, hadvela hashmeina, a thick fig cake. This one over here, the big fig cake. She'ein kemaisa ela ba'aretz she'echziko Oile Bavel. They only make cakes like this in the Oile Bavel territory where Demai applies. V'chein hatmarim hagdolim, or the oversized dates, really big dates. V'hacharuvin hashavim, and the straight carobs. Many carobs are crooked. These ones grow straight. V'ha'oirez halavan b'yoser, and very white rice. v'hakamain hagadol, and the big, oversized cumin, misasrin demai b'chol eretz Yisrael v'Suria. They must be tithed like you would tithe demai wherever you find them, in the land of Israel or in Syria, because they for sure come, they only grow in the proper land of Israel. The same would apply to all similar fruits like this. Halacha hey. Hachamarim sheheviu peiros litzor. So let's look at a map over here. This is the top of Israel. Israel goes into Lebanon. Somewhere in southern Lebanon, you have the city called Tzor, Tyre. So if donkey drivers, now today there's no Jews there, but there used to be Jews living there. So if donkey drivers, and we're going to soon see it means at least a caravan, not just one donkey driver, a whole bunch of donkey drivers, bring in fruit to Tzor, chayavin bidmai. They are obligated to be tithed as demai. If the donkey drivers are unlearned, you must take demai Maaser from the produce. Because you can assume that they came from the land of Bavel territory down here in Israel, which is close to it, nearby. Now, this top part of Israel would not really be part of the Oilei Bavel. It's a little bit lower down. But the point is, donkeys travel far distances, and they would get to here, and it's the closest area, so the produce probably came from there. With the exception of rice. There you don't have to worry about rice. Any rice that's found outside of Israel, even if it's near the land that was conquered by the Oilei Bavel territory, pater min admai, it's exempt from the Dmai laws, unless it was the rice we just talked about, the recognizable one, it was super white. Then, of course, as we just explained, it has to be worried about Dmai, but not otherwise any rice that comes from the diaspora. Halacha vav. Halekeach mibale oitzreis b'tzer. Not donkey drivers. You're buying from regular people who have storehouses of grain in the city of Tzor. Pater min admai. Here they're exempt from demai. We don't say like the donkey drivers, maybe they stored fruit from Israel. Why? Donkey drivers bring stuff from other places, but these are storehouses, they're local. They probably came from the same place. Same thing if an individual donkey, not a donkey caravan, one donkey, one driver, comes into Tzor full of produce, means they're exempt from the laws of demai because they can be presumed to have come from the local fruit of the city. If you buy from people that have storehouses in Sidon. Sidon is another city in Lebanon. Now notice on this map, Sidon is further out. Okay? But the Rambam is about to say that actually Sidon is closer, which causes a bit of a controversy in the commentaries. The Rambam says, if you buy from a person that has a storehouse in Sidon, chayav bidmai, it's obligated to, you have to worry about demai over there, because it's closer to Israel than Sur. So some commentaries say that the Rambam is talking about not the Sidon that we're familiar with, but actually one that was actually closer. There's another small town called Sidon down over here. And in that Sidon, which is closer to Israel, they had the presumption of actually storing Israeli produce, which would make it obligated in the laws of demai. But if you buy from donkey drivers in this place called Sidon, pater min admai, they're exempt from demai, because the presumption is that they bring from elsewhere in the diaspora. When it came to Tzor, which was further, they probably traveled from Israel. When it comes to Sidon, which is closer, they come from the other side, outside of Israel fruit. Halacha ches. Let's go back to this map. And we see the Oilei Bavel territory. This red area is where the laws of demai apply. And you buy not from another Jew, you buy from a Gentile. Idol-worshipping Gentile in the land that Oilei Bavel took possession of. If we're talking about a Gentile merchant, which we'll soon define what makes a merchant. But if he's a merchant who buys his grain from the Jew, from Jewish people, you have to worry that his produce is demai, because maybe he got it from an unlearned Jew. Lefichach, therefore, Barishaina in earlier times, Bizman Shahaya Reiv Eretz Yisrael Biyad Yisrael, when most of Israel belonged under Jewish authority, Halekeach Mikol Tagar Reivet Kechavim, anybody who bought from any merchant that was a Gentile, Maaser Demai Kilekeach Me'am Haaretz, would have to take the Maaser of Demai like a person who buys produce from an Am Haaretz. Ezehu Tagar. What's considered a merchant? At what point are you a merchant? He needs to bring produce to the market 2-3 times. Avalim hevi pam achas, but if he only brings one time to the market. Afilu hevi shalish masues bevas achas, even if he brings 3 loads. So enough for 3 trips, but he brings it only in 1 trip. Oisha hevi hu ubnai upayel, or it was him, his son, and a worker. So 3 guys carrying 3 loads, but they didn't bring it 3 separate times. Adayin lehuchzak tagar, he hasn't yet established his position as a merchant. A merchant you become after 2-3 trips to the market. Halacha yud. Another important rule about demai, kishe gazru al hademai, when the sages made the decree about demai, loy gazru al peiros chutz al haaretz shenichnusu laaretz. They never made a decree concerning diaspora fruit that came into Israel. In other words, even if, as the commentators explain, somebody grew the fruit outside of Israel, sold it to a Jew inside Israel, and the Jew inside Israel concluded the processing work associated with the produce, so in a way, its conclusion was in Israel. It doesn't matter. Since it came from the diaspora, there's no issue of demai. Halacha Yud Aleph, Peiros ha'aretz, sherabu al shel chutz ha'aretz. If you have a mixture now of fruit, Israeli fruit, and diaspora fruit, and there's a majority of Israeli fruit over the diaspora fruit, it works stringently. They're considered Israeli fruit, and if it's coming from an unlearned Jew, they're obligated to be tithed as demai. But if the mixture is diaspora fruit are more than the Israeli fruit, or things that are presumed to come from outside of Israel, they just don't grow that much in Israel, like walnuts. Oh, I got a picture of almonds, it's a mistake. Walnuts and plums, darmaskois are a type of plum. They're going to be exempt from demai because we follow the majority. Halacha Yud Beis, as the Rambam clarifies, when it comes to mixtures, and there's involvement of diaspora fruit, the sages chose not to follow loy achar hamare, v'loy achar hatam v'hareach. You don't go after looks, taste, smell. Even if the diaspora fruit have a unique look, or unique taste, or unique smell, those are not deciding factors when it comes to mixtures. Ella achar haroif, only the majority. Kol sherabu loy mutar, v'shaloy rabu loy aser. If there's a majority of diaspora fruit, good. No obligation of demai. If it's not the majority, it's forbidden. And that applies even in different regions, as the Rambam immediately explains. Keita, what does this mean? Rabu ba'ir avalei b'medina. If in the city there's a majority of diaspora fruit, but not in the Medina. The Medina, the commentaries over here say means like outlying areas around the city. Or in the outlying areas there's a majority, but not in the regular city. Elsewhere, the Rambam defines Medina and Ir as small towns and metropolises, so different sized cities. Point is, even if in one area it's more, one area it's less, Bahar v'le Rabu Babika, Babika v'le Bahar, if there's a majority in the mountainous regions, but not in the open plain valley regions, in the valley regions, not in the mountain regions, Rabu lechenveni v'le balabayis, lechenveni, if it's a majority for store owners, but not for homeowners, or for homeowners, not for store owners, Zesher Rabu by Mutter, Umakim Shalei Rabu by Chaya b'dmai. The bottom line is, where there's a majority of diaspora fruit, it's permitted, no demai needed. If it's not a majority of diaspora fruit, it's obligated in demai. If you buy it from an unlearned Jew, you must tithe it. Halacha Yud Gimel, Rabu Peiris Chutz Haaretz Bashuk V'nismatu. If at one point in time there's a majority of diaspora fruit in the market, so that you're exempt from demai, and then someone makes a big buy, and now there's a minority, there's more Israeli fruit, Chazar Ashuk Liyashnai. The market goes back to its old position. If you buy from it, now you're obligated in demai. In other words, it's all about the time. At this given time, is there a majority of Israeli fruit? Obligated. Majority of diaspora fruit? Exempt. Halacha Yudalit. Here's another list. Here's another list of things where there was no decree imposed on them when the sages made the decree about demai. It's a very important thing about rabbinic decrees is that they don't apply universally. If the rabbis at the time tell you that it applies only in specific cases, then that's where it applies. So in the case of demai, where they said that if you purchase produce from an Am Haaretz, you must tithe it out of doubt, they only said that when you're buying it for food. If you buy it for any other purpose, for example, the Rambam says we'll see a bunch of different cases, they're exempt for demai. Halekeach perish lizriya. A person buys produce for seed. He wants to plant it. Oy lahachila behema. Or he's buying produce to feed an animal, not for food. Kemach le'oiros. He's buying flour, again, not for food, but for processing hides. One of the ways to process leather was to pour flour on it. Oily melugma, oily retia. Or for a compress or a band-aid. In olden days, they didn't have band-aids like we have today. They would actually make these compresses, and many times they would have flour as part of the part of the bandage. So if you buy flour for this purpose, shemen lahadlakas haner, you buy oil to light a candle, a lamp, oil lamps, or to paint utensils. Today, I guess they have different materials for that, but like one of the ways to seal cracks on clay utensils was to kind of polish it with oil. So you bought the oil not for eating purposes. Yayin likiler, you bought wine for an eye ointment. They used to do this actually with wine. Take wine and apply it to the eyes. The chalas am haaretz, chala, that's taken by an am haaretz, by an unlearned Jew. You don't have to worry that there's demai there. The hameduma, if there's a mixture containing truma. The unlearned Jews are very careful about that. They stay away from truma issues. The halakuach bekesef Maaser sheni, anything which is bought with Maaser sheni money. This is going to be much more in the next set of laws. When you take the second tithe, ideally your obligation is to take the produce to Jerusalem. If you live too far from Jerusalem, you transfer the holiness to money, and you take the money to Jerusalem and you buy stuff there. So if you bought stuff with Maaser sheni money, you don't have to worry about demai. Ushiyare hamenachos, the leftover flour from the mincha offering. Mincha offering is an offering of flour. Part of the flour goes onto the mizbeach. Part of the flour is eaten. Whatever is left over, you don't have to worry about demai. V'toisves habikurim, and the additions to bikurim. So I chose the wrong fruits in this basket over here, but bikurim applies to the 7 special species that Israel is blessed with. As we're going to see in the laws of bikurim, what if a person only had 7 figs that were the first fruit figs? It's not nice to just bring 7 figs to the temple. So he would bring a whole bunch of, he would add some figs. You would add stuff to the bikurim. Kol elu pturim min admai. All these 12 things are exempt from demai. If an unlearned Jew tells you about any of these things, that they're fixed, all the appropriate separations have been made, you don't have to go ahead and take more tithes. There's no doubt about it. A person first buys fruit to eat, and then he changes his mind. He's like, you know what, I want to feed my pet with it. You cannot anymore sell them to a Gentile. And you actually can't feed the animals, even somebody else's animals, till you fix them like you would fix demai. Why? Because you bought it with the original intent of eating it. Fragrant oil that you mix with spices to make a nice smell. It's exempt from being tithed as demai because its presumption is that it's not for food. Shemen shalokach hasoidek l'sitei batzemer, wool, oil that was bought by a comber to put it into the wool. Poter min admai mipnei shu nivla batzemer is exempt from demai because it was always absorbed into the wool, and nobody ends up using it for human consumption. Aval shemen shalekeach ha'oidek losuch beinetz ba'isa. Here's a weaver. Weavers were dealing with very thin strings, and to make it very easy to access the strings, they would use oil between their fingers. Chayav bidmai. If you bought that oil from an unlearned Jew, you have to take Maaser like you would from demai. Because the oil will be absorbed into his body. And anointing stuff into your body is exactly like drinking in any place. If a Gentile asks a Jew to put some oil on his wound, asur bevadai. If it's definitely untithed produce, that's forbidden. Umutar bidmai. But if it's questionable produce, you can use it for a Gentile. If a Gentile puts some oil onto a board to roll on it, it's one of the ways they used to get like a back to rub your back with oil, is you would put oil onto a marble board and you would lie back on it and rub your back and you got it full of oil. So if a Gentile puts some oil down, once he stands up, a Jew can sit on it afterwards, because once the Gentile applies the oil to his flesh, the holiness level goes down. If a person has oil of demai, falls onto his skin, he didn't put it on purposely, it just fell on him. Just rub it in, no need to worry. Because once it fell on you, the holiness is off. So if a person buys wine for brine, they used to actually do this. You can even see this is called wine brine. They would mix wine with fish brine. Or you're making a mixture of aluntis is called wine and water. It's kind of a mixture that you would make to drink. Oikitnias, something like that. Oikitnias lases tchinin, or you bought legumes to make a crushed mixture. chayav bidmai. You're obligated in demai. These things are used for eating, and you have to tithe them if they were bought from an unlearned Jew. But if you buy already the mixture, you buy the mixture of wine and brine, or you buy the mixture of wine and water, or you bought the ready-made mixture of legumes and other herbs, they're exempt from demai, because the sage has never made a decree on mixtures of demai, only on inherently obligated foods. If the thing which got mixed in was a very important ingredient, like a spice or a leavening agent, since its taste is clearly identifiable, they don't become nullified until the entire mixture is obligated in demai. Halacha yutes. All of these last halachot from today's chapter that we learned, that all the exemptions from demai, where the decree was never made, im hiskin on demai, the hifrish me'em trumas maaser or maaser sheni, if you decided nevertheless to be like a strict ultra-Orthodox Jew, and to fix them like you would fix demai, which means you separated trumas maaser and maaser sheni, masha also what you did is done, and you must give the trumas maaser to the Kohen, and the maaser sheni must be kept as holy. Avolim tiken es hadmai kevadai. But if you have demai produce, questionable produce, and you treat it like definitely untithed produce, v'hifrish mimenu truma gdoila umaisres, and you take from it the great truma, the 2% of the Kohen, which doesn't have to be taken from demai, because even unlearned Jews were careful about that stuff, and all the tithes are separated. Oisha tiken es havadai bidmai, or the opposite. You fixed definitely untithed produce in a way that you would usually fix only demai, taking only part of the gifts. Lo asa klum, you haven't done anything. The Rambam concludes with two cases of mixtures. Halacha chaf. Kol ha'ir meicherin vadai ve'echad meicher demai. A whole bunch of shops. Everybody sells definitely untithed produce, and one shop sells demai, questionable produce. You buy some produce, you don't know who you bought it from. Ketad mesakin, how do you fix it? Now what's the question? Interesting question. When you have demai, the amount you have to fix is less. You only have to take trumas maaser and maaser sheni. When you have vadai, when you have real untithed produce, you must also take the great truma. So what do? So the Rambam says you got to do both. Mafrish truma utrumas maaser v'noistan lakayin. Separate the truma and the trumas maaser, give it to the kohen. Umafrish maaser sheni bilvad, and only separate the second tithe. No need to do the first one, because it's like demai. It's like the second tithe of demai. You treat it in a doubtful situation, with doubtful laws. If you have two boxes, achas tevel v'achas mesukan, one is again for sure untithed produce, and one is completely fixed produce. But of the achas memon, one of the boxes get lost, you don't know which is which. So the second one could either be fully tithed, could either be fully untithed. So out of doubt, what you do is mafrish min ashniya truma gdoilo trumas maaser v'noistan lechol kohen sheyirtze. Separate from the second one the great truma and trumas maaser, give it to any kohen you want. Or mafrish maaser sheni bilvad bidmai. Separate only the second tithe. Treat it as demai. Treat it as doubtful produce, because you don't know for sure that it was the untithed produce for sure.